Anybody who says Black Lives Matter as a mantra is a racist, is a systemic, fundamental, at heart racist.
Ever since white folks set foot on what is currently known as the United States, like we've been in a race war.
Welcome to Project Tumbleweed, a real-time documentary about life in America during a pandemic. My name is Scott Henderson, aka Scotty Hendo, and I'll be your guide. COVID-19 has turned life upside down and exposed old, unhealed wounds. It's becoming apparent that we have a long ways to go before we get through this. I'm traveling the country to meet with people of all stripes to learn how they're adjusting to these new realities, so that you can learn lessons to apply to your own life. In this episode, we'll start in Idaho and then make our way through Oregon. And along the way, we're going to meet a cattle rancher, the head of a performing arts center, museum director, a couple advocating for Native American tribal issues, a city economic development leader who's also an entrepreneur, and a campaign manager helping her tribal community. We'll pick up the journey in south central Idaho along the banks of the Snake River. Salmon running up from the Columbia River have long provided for the indigenous peoples who have lived here for tens of thousands of years. The Oregon Trail made its way through these parts, and we'll follow a shortcut some took in the trail to experience the transition from the arid high desert to the timber-rich Cascade Mountains and then down into the verdant Willamette River Valley. That transition in the landscape shows up in the people who live in these contrasting surroundings. It is interesting to observe how personal responsibility and communal action come into play differently, especially when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic and the issue of racial injustice.
I've got a friend who always says, man, it must be nice to work outside all the time. And it is nice to work outside all the time, but that means I never work in an air conditioning office. So on a hot day, I'm outside. On a cold day, I'm outside. When it's raining, I'm outside. When the wind's blowing, I'm outside. But I like that. So I'm kind of fed up with the bull crap of Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But until you stop caring about color and start realizing that all lives matter, you will always be a part of the problem. You know, my parents raised me to truly not care what color somebody is. And I don't know how to do it. I'm trying to do it with my kids. I don't know if I'll succeed or not, but I honestly can tell you all my life, I just haven't cared. I just don't feel like we value them like they need to be valued if you want to stay free as a society. And I think about that often. I hear of, things that the government's trying to do or that groups think are good ideas, and I think they're not recognizing the value of personal freedom.
So primarily what we do is we bring in touring productions. So your favorite, music artist or Broadway show will come into town. We would load them in, they would set up the show and do the performance that night and then load them out. And the business model is based on ticket sales, and it works really, really well when you can have events. Morrison Center for the Performing Arts, it was started 35 years ago. A vision of Harry and Velma Morrison. We're a couple that love the arts. They love to go to New York City and wanted to bring that quality of touring artists to Boise. We have a lot of plans to do a lot more collaborating with our community and our community artists and other organizations in town. So the arts are an expression of our soul, right? It's an expression of who we are as human beings. And so in almost any time of conflict or pain or loss in the world on a massive scale, the arts are there in some shape or form to heal. And I think we get to this moment where everything was shutting down around the arts that we forget that the artists and the arts are what we're turning to in our homes.
I run a museum, and it is an interdisciplinary museum called the High Desert Museum. My background's in anthropology, and I actually studied wildlife for my research. So the museum is a mix of live animals, rich culture from the people who have been here since time immemorial, and contemporary dynamics. So the High Desert is a significant portion of the Intermountain West, and we are on the western edge of it, nestled on the eastern side of the Cascades. And the eastern boundary is the western slope of the Rockies. Museums tend to be places where people with different perspectives come. That is a huge strength to bring people together who have different challenges, different perspectives. and provide a grounding foundation for building community. A key part of anthropology is being a participant observer, which is you are part of the activities and you are observing with an open mind, with curiosity. If all of us approached these narratives and stories and situations with curiosity and wonder to learn more, to understand more, that has, I think, profound implications for humanity.
Pandemics exist in and outside of this, right? This is the global COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. But what about the pandemic of not having clean water? What about the pandemic of not having healthy, safe, and sanitary housing? What about those pandemics? They still exist, and they're just as crushing for a lot of communities as we see COVID.
A lot of tribes have been a part of, since the self-determination era in the 70s, a part of recalling, remembering, and getting back to those traditional values, and then also operationalizing them into their tribal governing structures. I think that is partly that strength in, ancestral knowledge of this place is going to mean that we will sustain through this. I think settler is like a super nice term for what was a really violent process.
Oh, yeah.
Just like displaced. People talking about like gentrification, no, we are dispossessed of things. Mm-hmm. And that is a completely violent process. And we're still living with the remnants of that dispossession. There's a reason why Native folks are poor. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why we live in communities with no running water.
What you need to know, I think that I put the onus on you as someone who's living in this land to educate yourself. Educate, what was this land before there were settlers here? What did they do? How are they now?
I'm both and, so the job by day and then the side hustle by night. So the job by day, I'm a director of economic development for our economic agency in the city called Prosper Portland. And then kind of the side hustle, if you will, is also the food company that I started with my wife almost 6 years ago called Felton and Mary's Artisan Foods. My family actually kicked me out of the house. They got tired of me saying, "Stop, I'm on the phone call with the mayor." They're like, "Look, we all got to coexist, dude." So they actually went to carpet and hung up some sheets and kind of made a false wall in there and put lights up and a few plants to try to make it feel like home. And they're like, "There's your office." So I literally have spent the last 3.5 months in that shed every day. The uncertainty, because you begin to see the real impacts of the virus in terms of just how many people were contracting it. We also had was fortunate enough to get on a call with economic development directors from San Francisco, Seattle, and New York. And we started having these weekly chats. And as you remember back then, they were probably 2 weeks or a month ahead of us. And so hearing their stories it was great to be in the room, but they were very disconcerting. So that also was oh my gosh, this is a legit, real thing. I realized when I stepped into working at Prosper Portland, I was kind of moving into the bowels of the beast. And a lot of my work around equity was going to have a lot to do with trying to reform it from the inside out. And I feel very fortunate the role that I currently have and I serve in really affords me a chance to both display leadership that reflects that, but also to pull some of those levers and position resources, strategies to really help a much broader array of business owners in our city that currently or historically have not been valued or esteemed. And I think it's really been to a detriment of our economy. I've always said is if you have 12 oars that you can put in the water, but you only row with 2, there's some foolishness with that. And in many ways, racism is that. It is supremely serving one community over the whole, and yet you have the whole have the same capacity, appetite, potential to create businesses, business innovation, and be leaders of the rich assets that we have, not only in our state, but in our region. And so it's not just becoming an anti-racist organization or becoming more equitable isn't just a moral imperative, it just is economically smart.
Currently, I am working on volunteering with my sister, Terry Jo Squinfagnazi, and my cousin, Mallory Smith. The three of us together, we are trying to combat the water infrastructure issues that are happening on the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs Reservation. And the Choosh Fund was actually started in collaboration with the MRG Foundation, which is a local organization here in the Portland area. And they're working in collaboration and partnership with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. There's over 3,000 community members who currently live there, and over 60% of them do not have access to running water, or they have very low pressured water. So they don't have that basic human right where they can wake up in the morning, brush their teeth, wash their face, get a drink of water, and wash their hands in the middle of a pandemic. Prior to the May primary election, Oregon May primary election, I was working on 2 campaigns. The one that I'm currently working on with Karina Miller, and then also William Miller. And William, he was running for House District 50, just right in our neighbors over here. And instead of going door to door, we had to flip our entire campaign plan, and it had to all go either virtually or calling people. There's just and I was the field director for that campaign. So it was kind of like relying on me and also the team to figure out new ways to get in contact with voters. It's definitely working in our advantage right now. We went to the store to get more groceries, and it was empty. There was hardly anything at the grocery store. And that's the moment when I was like, wow, COVID-19 is real, and we might be having to go look for our own food somewhere else. In our traditional way, we used to hunt, fish, gather, and there's still people who actively do this. But in my mind, I was thinking, I never learned how to properly hunt, how to properly fish. I've never been a traditional gatherer like many are in my community, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to learn how to do this. And I've never learned this stuff, but I've been part of these ceremonies, I've been part of the processes, but I've never been actually doing it myself. And that's where that uncertainty of going into a store and having to depend on a grocery store is what scared me.
I wish everyone would just put that aside and get along. Everybody has something of value to offer.
We need to let go of the fear. Not only the fear of change, but just the fear of other, and the fear of, we think showing force is strength. Oftentimes it's just cover for fear.
Just continuing to show up as who we are and representing yourself, your family, your community with dignity and respect, and never, just never giving up, I guess, and continuing to live for the next 7 generations, continuing to learn for the next 7 generations, and continuing to try to push yourself to continue to pave these ways for the next 7 generations that are coming after us.
Change can sometimes come slowly, and then other times suddenly. When inescapable truths emerge into the bright light of our consciousness, change is inevitable. This pandemic has brought many long-standing injustices into that light. Naming them and then acknowledging they exist are just the first steps in healing the personal and collective wounds they've created and continue to create. How do we heal these wounds? How do we address the inequalities that benefit just a few of us at the expense of our brothers and sisters? How can we come together to build a more just society that embraces everyone and helps each person unlock their innate potential? That's a future that I think most of us want, because we know deep down inside of us that that's the most resilient path forward. That brings us to the end of this episode. In the show notes below, you can find links to the full-length rough-cut interviews of everyone featured here. There's a treasure trove of insights for you to discover. If you like this episode, please leave a comment and share the link with your friends.